podcast for today. It's a hot topic on a hot day. It's about housing delivery. And our guest, Michaela Sullivan, you are forged with geography, town planning and business qualifications. And with planning experience across the UK, you were Jim McKinnon's right hand for the previous reforms. You're a director of CALA, you're involved with the SPF, the Scottish Property Federation, and the Homes for Scotland, as well as having a career as a land manager at the moment for private national house builder CALA. This experience must give you a pretty unique 3D perspective of the planning system in practice. You've always got interesting things to say and you're blessed with a good sense of humour. So on that basis, given the existing year-on-year shortfall in annual housing build rate, exacerbated by COVID, how do we get more housing delivered on the ground, Michaela?
Thanks, Alison. I think one of the most important things is that we need to match action with headlines, because the issues around the delivery of housing are kind of something that arises below the headlines that Scotland has a housing crisis, we need more homes on the ground. So we start off from that premise, and we start with a plan-led system, and then it doesn't seem to quite flow from there as rapidly or as sort of effectively as perhaps it could. And so we need to look, one, at how we plan and how effective that process is. And obviously we've just gone through a new process of reform, so there's an opportunity for perhaps development planning to be changed in the way it's done, and maybe for communities to be involved more, perhaps through using more technology or e-planning techniques to try and actually get communities more involved at the development plan stage, and to also consider communities, I think, as a whole across, for example, an urban area. So the community is all the people within that area, those that are in need of a home, those that are overcrowded, those that can't afford to get on the housing ladder, as well as those who, quite frankly, sometimes just sit in the home that they have, saying that they don't want any more to be built. So there's quite a lot, I think, that could happen, which, as I say, would bring forward action that would match the headlines.
Yeah, and you think other things like infrastructure delivery, you think that has an impact on it too?
Infrastructure really needs to go hand in hand with planning, and obviously development plans are proposals for what should happen, but they don't always match with any plans or proposals for the delivery of infrastructure. And you know, the new Act has kind of grappled with that to a certain extent, but not really reached a conclusion on it. And we do need to work out how, when we development plan for new development, we also then bring forward the infrastructure that it would be required to enable the plan for development to be delivered. And an awful lot of the objection that we see to any development proposal we put forward is actually quite often focused towards deficits in infrastructure. So when people object to development, what they're objecting to quite often is, you know, I have to wait too long already for a GP appointment. This is going to create too much traffic chaos in my area, and so on and so forth. And so the way that the system is going to link development plans with infrastructure delivery is something that's going to be crucial in the, you know, sort of roll forward of the current planning reforms.
And you think that's part of the emphasis on focusing on the positives of development rather than on the negatives of them?
I think that's essential. Again, you know, there is a need for more housing. You know, the basic economics of supply and demand and constantly rising prices that have occurred in quite a large part of Scotland make it clear to us that we're not building enough homes to meet the need. And I think what's important is for there to be a perhaps a broader appreciation of the fact that development doesn't create need. It's the other way round. And, you know, we find that quite often there's an attempt to kind of micromanage to a really large extent the number of homes that are planned for within local authority areas. And you know, you can find you know, recent examples of authorities that have brought forward a new development plan, for example, only allocating one new site across the whole of the planning area, not naming any names, but some of my colleagues will know where I'm talking about. And, you know, whilst we continue with that approach, you know, and the sort of aim to essentially repress housing development and you know, commensurate concerns with you know, whether or not the development industry makes a profit from developing and so on and so forth, we're going to find difficulties in actually meeting the need that's there.
Yeah. And so what, I suppose you've discussed, you know, the plan-led and the link with the infrastructure. Are these presently barriers to development because of how we're dealing with them, or can we improve what we're presently creating to make the system more streamlined?
I think that I quite often end up saying that there's nothing wrong with planning, you know, and we keep reforming it. But, you know, the fact is that we need to change almost the attitude or the emphasis. And, you know, since the 2006 Act, we've been talking about culture change and so on and so forth. But we still have quite often, you know, across society and within the way that we plan for new housing, a negative attitude towards new housing. So, you know, we need to find a path through this, and I would suggest that communities being involved at the development plan stage, and perhaps, you know, making it easier and making development plans more interesting, as being a way of allowing communities to be involved in those decisions of principle, because you know, you can find, for every politician that's on the edge of a city saying, you know, I'm going to protect the green belt with my life, you'll find a politician in perhaps a more central area of the city saying, I will protect the you know, the sort of diversity and the complex urban grain of this area with my life. And, you know, to achieve successful development, you probably need to you know, perhaps develop some more greenfields, and perhaps also regenerate and you know, repurpose some of the more complex urban areas as well. But whilst there's this polarity and this, you know, determination for everybody to try and keep their patch the same, we present ourselves with difficulties.
Yeah. And do you think things like land value capture, do you think something like that is going to improve or make it even more complicated to try and you know, get sites into development plans and eventually turn them into housing development?
I think anything that improves the clarity and the understanding of how the system is going to unfold will be helpful. And I would put land value capture into that category. I think it has potential to remove some of the time and effort and energy that's spent negotiating agreements and, you know, what should and shouldn't be in agreements and so on and so forth. But there are potential difficulties around it if the rate is set at such a level that it, for example, acts as a disincentive to landowners to sell their land in the first place. Yeah. And you know, we need to guard against that. And I think that there are also potential difficulties around any proposal for land value capture which then doesn't recycle the value that's captured within the local area from which it's collected. And I have concerns about any kind of across the board land value capture that could see land value captured in Glasgow being spent in Inverness, for example. And I also think that quite often when we have a Section 106 agreement, we deal with things that are immediately within the local area, a new classroom for the school from which most of the children that live in the new homes will go to, or a traffic light junction improvement or a roundabout or something like that. And if there's a kind of broad system of land value capture, there is a risk that we take away those kind of small mitigation measures, which are actually really quite important in allowing a development to become a cohesive part of its local area. So I'm not opposed to land value capture by any means, but I think we need to think very carefully about how we do it. And I think that for the Scottish Government, they'll have to consider there are issues around land value capture, capital gains tax, and the fact that you potentially can't have two bites at the cherry, and you have to do one or the other, and so on and so forth. So yes, it's there as something that I think needs a lot more thought, but could actually be brought in and could potentially create a clearer, more simplified way of dealing with all these matters.
And maybe link, as you were discussing earlier, with the development plan in the first place, because if it's upfront right from the start and the community are engaged at that point, then the things that would help the community cope with whatever additional development round about could all be looked at the same time.
Absolutely. The more that we start with a cohesive, genuine plan for an area, and that plan includes meeting all the needs of both the existing and the new community and allowing them to mesh together, the better off we'll all be.
Yeah. So with that in mind, obviously the Scottish Government have issued this technical paper to amend the SPP. What's your view of that?
I think it's quite challenging, and I think that it's been brought out to address perhaps one, or a couple of court cases around the way housing land numbers are calculated, and around how we should interpret sites which are not within the development plan. And I do consider it perhaps to be a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, to be honest. Certainly I've been involved in discussions around it with both the Scottish Property Federation and with Homes for Scotland, and there's a widespread concern about the content of it. And some of that I think relates in paragraph 7. There is a sort of potentially problematic area where Section 25, obviously, of the Act requires applications to be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And that's been the kind of tenet of how we determine planning applications probably back since 1947, to be honest, or thereabouts. I'm not sure it was the intention, but the wording of the first bullet in paragraph 7 seems actually to sort of fly in the face of the Act and give the development plan some sort of supremacy that it's not meant to have, and that in itself is problematic. And then I think also, a development plan is clearly tries to envisage how things will change and what will happen across an area over a period of time. And that's never going to be perfect. It's a view or a vision.
And it's not absolute either.
And not absolute either, exactly. And then things will happen and change. And paragraphs 32 and 33, I think, are the paragraphs that deal with that potential for change, or you know, the way things that might unfold differently. And so the proposal to sort of, one, get rid of the you know, the sort of commitment to development that contributes to sustainable development. It's an awkward phrase, but you know, I think the reasoning behind it was sound, and it's been there for 6 years, and I'm not aware that it's causing you know, the sort of problems that you know, that it's perhaps being now painted to be causing. And paragraph 32 and 33 deal with uncertainty. So 32 deals with uncertainty within the plan area, and essentially allows for change during the plan period. For example, windfall sites coming forward, or proposals that, whilst they don't accord with the plan, do accord with you know, aspirations within the general area. And if you take that away, similarly 33 deals with failures to plan. And you know, it's not unreasonable, because we do find development plans are out of date. We find development plans that simply aren't, for example, addressing the housing need in the area. And those two paragraphs gave us a mechanism to deal with applications that suffered in that regard. And so the proposal to take them away but not replace them with anything leaves us with a situation where, you know, if you take the bullet point in paragraph 7 that says, you know, the development plan is everything, and then the ability to deal with the anomalies is also gone, we potentially have a problem. And you know, I think the aim, the stated aim at the start of the document, is to remove you know, confrontation and problems. And you know, I was speaking to our chief planner this morning about this topic, and you know, he was very much emphasizing the fact that, you know, he wants to move away from the adversarial side and the fact that there have been these court cases. But my fear is that if we don't change the way this is worded, it's going to lead to more adversarial and problematic planning in the future. Neil might be pleased about that, but not everybody will.
No. We're concerned about getting houses delivered. And of course, one of the other key strands of it is about, and it comes from the Gladman decision, is about how you actually calculate the numbers of housing as well, you know, effective land supply. And that is something that is tied with your local development plan too. And so the two things, as you say, relate in that if you're going to have development plans that are not turning over very quickly, then the problems that you've discussed are even more exacerbated.
I think that's right. You know, I don't want to dwell on the minutiae of how we calculate housing land numbers, because it itself, I'm sure nobody wants to listen to that. It's problematic. It's been problematic for years. And, you know, this decision just adds another layer onto, you know, those general problems. And the fact that, you know, we've got competing methodologies, we've got, you know, reporters, and, you know, the development industry spending time and effort debating this is all part of perhaps, if I go back to what I said in the very beginning, this kind of attitude about being almost negative towards housing development, and the attempt by the planning system to micromanage how housing land numbers are calculated and how homes are delivered, are part of the problem. The decision, is just another layer in that whole chapter of, you know, not essentially approaching this with the right spirit, I think.
Yeah. And of course, what we need to say too is that the technical paper relates to more than just housing development. So, you know, removing the guilty balance and these sort of things will have a wider effect than just to housing delivery.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the development that contributes to sustainable development is not just about housing, you know, and if you take that away because of a court case that dealt with housing, then, you know, you leave a
system
void.
Very vulnerable. Yeah,
indeed, that's right.
And I mentioned in the intro that you were involved in the reforms with Jim McKinnon for 2006. Was this something that you saw coming as a result of that, or has this built up its own momentum over time?
We debated around the time that we did the 2006 Act, you know, we debated attitudes towards housing delivery. And at that time, along parallel with the Planning Act, obviously, there were the series of SPPs, and those have now been distilled down into one single SPP. But immediately after the 2006 Act was completed, and work had begun, you know, before that, what was SPP3, the housing paper, was revised at that point. And Jim McKinnon introduced the concept of generosity,
Yes.
Which we've all talked about endlessly since that time. But that was actually aimed at dealing with precisely this point, that you know, the terminology of generosity was supposed to deal with this kind of attempt to, you know, control housing numbers to perhaps too large an extent, and, you know, as is always the way with planning and perhaps planners, you know, we've continued along the original course. We've just added extra debate about how generous and what type of generosity, and we haven't really resolved the issue, that we're actually quite negative towards planning for housing development.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's changed since 2006.
Changed, despite given the amount of reform and, you know, looking at the system, maybe there's some cold hard truths to be faced there.
I think so. I just struggle slightly with, you know, everything that's been said and done towards changing this, and, you know, the recent court cases, and, you know, the debate in Inverclyde about how housing land numbers are to be calculated, and, you know, the proposals in the new technical paper, which I don't, as I say, really want to get into the detail of, but, you know, they're not going to work, the proposals in the new technical paper, you know, and you know, we can't sort of almost deny the reality of, you know, the fact that in order to deliver homes effectively, we need to have a wide range and choice of sites, and we need our planning authorities to be supporting that range and choice of sites
Scotland.
Right across Scotland, indeed. And you also need to be considering the rate at which homes can be delivered off each site, and, you know, the programming and so on. And you know, some of the technical paper seems to be trying to water some of that down. But actually, what we find is that you tend to get a political headline that will say, for example, well, there's, you know, we've already granted planning permission for X hundred or X thousand homes in the area, so therefore, you know, there shouldn't be a shortfall, or there isn't any need for any further or additional housing. And, you know, they may be counting, for example, a site say for 500 homes, when the reality of the way that the build out and the market for those homes will work, it could take 6 or 7 years for them to be built out. I mean, that could take you through and beyond a plan period under the current system, albeit, you know, we're moving perhaps to a longer plan period. So it's quite easy to you know, almost manipulate the figures to make it look as though there's absolutely plenty of land identified for housing. But if that were really the case, then, you know, more homes would be being delivered on the ground. And, you know, I do have concerns about this kind of idea that's quite often painted. It's usually politically generated rather than from planners or within the development industry. This idea that, you know, developers sit on planning permissions once they've got them in order to wait for land values to rise, and you know, there is literally no logic to it, and it is a myth. But what we do obviously is to build out homes at a sensible rate, and at a rate that the market within the area can absorb. And you know, those things are important, and if you conflate the two, you can create the sort of headlines that we see that say, you know, there's already plenty of land for housing development, or there's, you know, X number of homes consented and only Y number built, without really thinking about you know, how we program that and how they're delivered. And it really is quite important, and that will go to the heart of a lot of responses, I think, to this technical paper that's been brought out. And I imagine, you know, my colleagues in Homes for Scotland will be working overtime in terms of trying to demonstrate to our political masters why it's important that they fix that element of it.
Yeah. And maybe that's a good move on then to ask you about how do we build the sort of houses that people want? You know, you're talking about where they are, and every area has got to provide them. But you know, how do we deliver what people actually want? And I suppose COVID's brought into focus people working from home. You know, we've got our attic workers and our kitchen workers and our spare bedroom workers and all of that. So, you know, supply and demand, how does that feed in? And also with the green agenda and the environmental requirements, you know, we've got to take on board as housing developers.
There's a lot in that question.
Yeah, there is. Shovel.
In terms of building what people want, I think that as an industry, we're quite good at that.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, by and large, we do understand our customers. We do a lot of research, and, you know, we very rarely have difficulty selling the products that we're building. So therefore, I do think that we're actually building the type of homes as an industry. I think we're building the type of homes that people want. I think that there are some quite complex issues around what people want and what people who are involved in the planning for housing consider that people need. Yeah. And so I think, you know, you could get into some quite interesting debates about the difference between people's housing need and their aspiration. And, you know, I'm concerned about the way that, you know, the planning system is moving towards trying to almost regulate the proportion of homes that we build at various sizes and scales. You know, and if you do a straightforward mathematical calculation, you can say there are so many one-bedroom households needed because there are so many single person households, and that maybe denies, you know, dads with kids who come to stay, and, you know, people who perhaps regularly have elderly relatives to stay, and just people who frankly want some more space because they want a room that they like to play their guitars in, or whatever it is that floats their boat, you know. And so, you know, the developers, those of us who actually decide what to put on sites, are probably the best people to listen to in terms of, you know, understanding that housing aspiration as opposed to need, and, you know, requiring, if you like, the delivery of, you know, X number of 1-bedroom flats and X number of 2-bedroom flats and so on, potentially kind of mitigates against those decisions, which I think is probably not the way that the planning system should be, you know, focusing its energy, if you like.
Because it goes back to what you were saying originally as well, and it becomes a bit of a numbers game then, doesn't it? Because if it's 1-bedroom flats mean this amount of contributions and 2 bedrooms mean this, instead of looking at what actual, I don't know, floor plan or actual implication a particular development has.
That's true, and it actually also goes back to development planning as well. You know, if you identify sites for development that are, you know, in the center of urban areas, you know, perhaps previously developed sites in the center of urban areas, the chances are that the you know, the type of development that's going to go onto those sites is naturally going to be towards the, you know, smaller, higher density end of things. And if you identify greenfield sites on the edge of settlements, then, you know, we're more likely to build, you know, the larger family houses with the bigger gardens and so on and so forth. So, you know, if development planning is effective, you'll end up with a range and choice of types and sizes by dint of what you identify as, you know, the sites for development in the first place. And if the development plan is not effective and doesn't really do that, but tries to, you know, for example, lump all the development somewhere where they think that least objection is going to come forward, rather than actually really thinking about, you know, the urban grain and how the city works, you know, the two things can sort of work against one another, really. But as I say, you know, I stress, I do think that we're quite good at knowing what our customers want. And you also mentioned the kind of environmental side of things. I think this is actually one of the biggest challenges that we face over the next few years, that we really are moving into a period of change. And as we go forward, you know, we are going to have to take our customers on a journey with us, as we start to build homes which are, you know, moving progressively towards carbon neutral status. And, you know, those homes are going to be heated quite differently from the way that the majority of homes in Scotland just now are heated, for example. You know, they'll no longer have gas boilers, they'll no longer have gas hobs, they'll no longer have gas fires, lots of things that people are used to. And, you know, they will increasingly be electrified, and, you know, heat pumps and all sorts of things. So, you know, people are going to have to get used to that, and learn to understand it and learn how it works. And also, I think that there is a risk, I think we sit on a bit of a knife edge, where there's a risk that, you know, sort of regulations and so on push us towards ticking carbon boxes, that will actually create homes that potentially are not as nice to live in, as homes that are perhaps heated in another way, or, you know, have other characteristics.
Just because it would be cheaper to produce them, or?
No, I think it's you know, if we talk about reducing carbon, you make homes, for example, more and more airtight. So, you know, and more insulated, for example, so that, you know, you don't let the precious heat out. But then, you know, you at potential expense, for example, of the circulation of air and fresh air and so on and so forth. Or, you know, if you take all homes to off gas grid, you no longer have gas boilers, you know, you potentially, you know, don't build things like wood burning stoves, which, you know, have implications for carbon and so on and so forth. You maybe change where the heart of some people's homes are, you know, and the way people regard the heart of their homes. So, you know, the aspiration to reduce carbon is essential. You know, it's not something that we can change, but it is going to change the way people live. And both in new homes, and I think also, you know, quite a lot of the measures, if we're really going to make a difference, will have to be retrofitted to older homes as well. And, you know, all of that has to be thought about, you know, as we go forward, and some quite significant changes in development over the next few years. Big challenges ahead. Yeah,
well, on lots of fronts.
Yes.
So I was going to pass over to Neil, who has been looking at the questions and probably has a couple of questions himself to wrap up with.
Yeah, thanks. I've obviously been listening intently as well, and you've covered a lot of ground, which is fantastic. Just to start, a couple of people have raised the inevitable conundrum that volume builders obviously have a profit objective, and I don't think anyone's necessarily meaning that's a bad thing. It's just something that we've got to be aware of, and understandably, it's an issue of if a commercial risk is being taken, then people expect to get a return for that. But taking it into the sort of planning sphere, that because of that profit objective, although you're building what people want, that of necessity is limited to the houses that you know you can sell and make the profit. So that will leave some geographic areas or some specific needs, which possibly the volume builders might not be addressing. And just interested what thoughts you've got about what the planning system can do to address that, or if it's really more an issue of Scottish Government looking and trying to work out how to bring back the local builders who maybe because of local knowledge and possibly ability to take on a lower profit margin, are maybe in a position to develop sites that the volume builders might not.
I think there is a lot of place within Scotland for a range of developers to be working, and you know, we're able to work alongside one another rather than directly in competition with one another. And you know, going back to what I said about development plans making a range and choice of sites available, and you know, considering the needs of sort of, you know, a wide range of different, you know, consumers of new development. The more that we plan for a variety, the more then will be the possibility for different scales and types of developers, you know, to take on sites. And you know, if there are allocated sites for between 5 and 10 units, then you know, none of the volume builders will probably go to those locations, whereas you know, some of the bigger sites that are allocated are perhaps more the sites that the volume builders will go to. So you know, the planning system has to a degree, you know, a remedy within it. In terms of the, you know, the issues around the you know, the kind of profit motive or whatever of development, I think it's perhaps overplayed to a certain degree, and it's something that people get themselves exercised about when you know, it's not, if you like, as important as it's set out to be. Yes, of course, when we go into a development, we aim to make a profit out of it, and we don't apologize for that, because the profit that we generate, one, we're wholly owned by a large pension fund, so the profit that we generate goes back to that pension fund, for example, and is then, that money is then recycled in other ways, as part of that major financial organization. And, in making a profit, we pay our people, we pay our subcontractors, they then go and spend money in the local area, they pay their own mortgages, and so on and so forth. So,
pay tax.
They pay their tax as well, indeed. So I don't think we should be concerning ourselves about development making a profit. And I think sometimes people confuse the land value uplift, which actually doesn't go to the developer, with the profit that arises from development. By and large, as an industry, we work within parameters, and you can identify those from looking at any of our annual reports, and there's a percentage of overheads and there's a percentage of profit that we aim to make on each development, which is not extraordinary or super profit, and we take on more risk on some sites than we do on others. We take on market risk, we take on ground risk, and depending on what we know about a site and how well we understand it, and what the marketplace is like, we may flex the level of profit that we're aiming for, but across the whole, if you look at and I don't imagine that ours are any different from any of our competitors, some of the sites fall short of what was originally aimed for, and some of them exceed it, and overall we end up roundabout in the middle. And the small developers won't be working to a very significantly different aim in terms of trying to sell their homes for a profit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to maybe wrap things up, because we're coming up now for the close time, what one thing do you feel, if there was to be a change, if you were the chief planner or the planning minister, and someone said to you, what's the one thing you want to do that you feel would make the biggest difference to housing delivery? What would that one thing be?
Neil, what I think it would be is for everybody to mean what they say. So when we, publish a headline that says we need more homes in Scotland, for that to actually cascade right down through the system, so that efficiently and effectively we can actually deliver more homes for Scotland.
That's a very good answer. Very good. I like that. Well, that's a very good place to round it up. Thank you both for covering so much ground. It's a really interesting discussion. It's obviously a really big topic, but very important to us all, definitely. So thank you both. Thank you to our audience and to the people who asked the questions. Just to let everybody know, we're continuing doing these podcasts every 3 weeks. So the next one, as is up on your screen, will be on the 27th of August. And we're delighted to be joined by Rhiannon, who's the Vice Chair of the Scottish Young Planners Network. We were very conscious that there's a lot of different perspectives on the planning system, and we wanted to use this podcast to gather as many of those perspectives as we can. So was very keen to involve the Young Planners Network. I've spoken previously at their conference. Such an enthusiastic bunch, so many ideas, so great opportunity to capture some of that. So please put a note in your diary when the details are on our website. If you're on our mailing list, please do book your place. And If you want to listen to this podcast again, it will be available on our website in a few days' time. It's a good opportunity to listen to it again, or if you've got colleagues that you feel should have a listen, please feel free to give them that recommendation. So thanks again to Alison and to Michaela, and everyone have a good evening. It's still sunny in Edinburgh. Hopefully it's all still sunny where you are and you get a chance to go and enjoy it. Have a good night.